history is the story of people. My old grandfather telling me stories on the porch in the summertime really whetted my appetite for early events, and that's exactly what I hope my paintings do for future generations. I hope that the children and the adults living around Shawnee can look at this canvas and realize that there were people struggling and people having a good time, and very historic things happening here. The mural starts with the dawn of history, and the dawn of history, of course, is the Indian culture that lived near what later became called Gum Springs and Mill Creek and so forth. And so in the painting, there's a woman with her daughter and the wolf-like dog that's drinking at the spring, and the various activities of the people living in what later became Shawnee. And it's actually at sunrise, so it is the dawn of the painting. And then the painting is composed in such a way that there are groupings of people, and then they're tied together with events. And so the first grouping is the immigrant Indians, and then the early white men that came to Shawnee, I should say European people who came to Shawnee. And of course the first were the French, and prominent is a French Marine holding the flag of Orleans, the French flag, and then just below him is de Bourmont, the great explorer that was out here in the early 1700s. Actually, he came in the late 1600s, but in 1724 he probably went through the northern part of Shawnee near the Kaw River, and certainly his men hunted in this area. Directly above his head is White Plume, the Kansa chief, speaking of the indigenous people that lived here. And then, of course, in the 1820s and 30s, the immigrant Indians came here that Shawnee's named after, the Shawnee Indians, Shawanoes. And directly behind White Plume is Katiqua, which is female eagle, and she was an important resident in the area. And adjacent to hers, Tenskwatawa, the prophet, who was the brother of Tecumseh, and he was probably one of the most traditional Indians that lived here, and was buried close by. Now adjacent to de Bourmont is the young Blue Jacket. He came here as a 16-year-old boy, trained by the Quaker missionaries. He became a translator, and and later became one of the pillars of the community. Directly above him is Frederick Choteau. He and his brother Cyprian lived here. They were French fur traders, actually French Indian fur traders, and their home is near the top of the painting here, the Choteau place that later became the McEnany place. Adjacent to Frederick Choteau, the man with the rifle, by the way, he was an artist too, besides being an entrepreneur in the fur trapping business, is Graham Rogers, who's one of the last chiefs of the Shawnees. And then there's a juxtaposition structures here. Two buildings. One is the ancient council house built around 1830, and then the little Methodist meeting house across from it. Both acted as council house to the Indians at different times. Above all the figures is a column from the council house, which has the turtle totem on it, which was the clan symbol of Charles Bluejacket. And so in this juxtaposition structures of the church and the meeting house, we have a transition of the cultures. In front of the council house is a powwow, and then later you also have the Christian meeting there. The two cultures coexisted and in many times infused each other. They were not contradictory at all. The Shawnees were a thankful people that had ceremonies like the green corn dance and so forth. Also in this little cluster of homes is the Chris Fangrove cabin, which is one of the earliest cabins, is built in brick. Tradition takes it back to a point that perhaps during the Indian period, but we know that Fangrove lived there and that later it became a station stop for the stagecoaches that came through Shawnee, about 3 different lines. The wagon master's house, built by Jack and Uriah Garrett, English stonemasons from Devonshire. And then the wagons. Actually, Shawnee was not on the Santa Fe Trail, the main trail, but the Santa Fe Trail had many tributaries in this area, and there would have been a lot of traffic passing down the military road, which went through Shawnee, and also from the blacksmith shop and so forth. It would have been a service area for a lot of the wagon trains, for the beginning of wagon trains. Now in the next cluster of people, very appropriately next to the freight wagon is Dick Williams and his wife Margaret and their children. Dick was a wagon master on the Santa Fe Trail. He was born in 1830 in Tennessee and came here and married an Indian girl, Margaret Parks. Directly behind Dick Williams, and he, by the way, wears the badge of the wagon master, a bullwhip around his neck. We have Sam Garrett and I believe Jack Garrett behind him. Directly above Sam Garrett in the hat here, we have Patrick McEnany in his Union uniform. He served as a soldier in the Civil War, and he was a friend of the Indians, actually adopted by them, and his family have been prominent members of the community through the years. Now directly above Patrick McEnany is Wild Bill Hickok, and he got his name right here in the Shawnee area. He was actually the constable of Monticello, just west of Shawnee, and there's stories of him as a young man practicing on oyster cans, shooting. He must have practiced well because he became a notorious gunfighter later on. Directly below him is a completely different culture. We have the pastor of the local church, the missionary that our county's named after, Thomas Johnson, and his hand is on a little Indian boy that will become a part of his mission. Now, from this period, we go into the transition of the Bleeding Kansas period, of which Shawnee was involved in. There was turbulence, and the Indians were unsettled to the point that some of them actually moved to Oklahoma prematurely and left their homes during the Civil War. And so we have the military road, which passed between Fort Leavenworth and Fort Scott, passing right through Shawnee. We have it clearly marked over near Neiman Road. And directly below that is the man that was so important on the trail, the blacksmith, the Star Blacksmith Shop, and at his anvil. Shawnee was certainly a support to the Santa Fe, Oregon, and California trails. We go to the next panel, and the first figure that's prominent there is William Quantrill. Quantrill on October the 17th, 1862, came to Shawnee sometime around sundown or a little after, and he burned selectively different homes and businesses in Shawnee, and he left some Southern sympathizers, so that after the terrible raid, some of the people living there felt so uncomfortable that they actually moved their home. And so we have a man named David G. Campbell, who moved his home from Shawnee to the east, and it became Campbelltown, which later became Merriam. He was the founder of Merriam, and he took his slave with him, Cornelius Jackson. But that's another story. Now, there was an incident that occurred during the burning of Shawnee. There was a little German cobbler who had his shop near the square, and Quantrill's men set the place on fire, and the wife called out and said, "My baby's upstairs." So one of Quantrill's men ran in and ran upstairs and brought down the cradle with the little baby. And the sad postscript to that is that the next day it rained, and they didn't have enough shelter, and the little baby died of pneumonia. But the Higgins house is burning in the background. You see the old town jail there, which wasn't burned. There's a woman mourning over the death of her husband. There were two men killed there on the square. And then adjacent to this, and making a transition into the Reconstruction period of Shawnee, we have probably one of the most important implements of the Reconstruction period, and even before it dates back to the beginning of our country, is the broadaxe. The broadaxe was so important because you could square up logs and make cabins out of it. So the broadaxe is a prominent element here, and it connects to the next grouping. But framed above the broadaxe is the rebuilding of the community, and also that terrible period of retribution toward anyone who stole horses or did anything at that time. We had a hanging tree in Shawnee. It was an old hickory tree, and we know of at least 9 men that met their fate on that hanging tree. So frontier justice is given out in the background there. and that was this turbulent period following the Civil War. Charles Bluejacket came as a little boy of 16. He matured, became an interpreter, became a minister in the church, became principal chief of the Shawnees, and during the war, after the burning of Shawnee, he became a captain of militia. But here we have a picture of him doing what he loved to do most, and that is visit with and teach his children. At one time, he had a household of 23 children, adopting many of them that were orphaned during the war, and several natural children. And he took time daily to sit down with them and read the Bible, have devotions, and counsel with them. We have the Calkins electric place now, which was the old Chris Van Grove brick cabin, being used as a stagecoach stop. There was the Sanderson stage and the Wells Fargo, the Overland stages passed by here. Some going as far as Santa Fe, some going directly south along the military road to Fort Scott. So this was a place where horses were put to the stage and people would wait and freight was left. Now directly adjacent to that is a little store, a little country store that sold dry goods and coal and various other things, hay I believe, run by a German family, Peter Wirtz. And Peter not only had a store, but he used it as a gathering place for the Catholic community, and so it became the founding structure for St. Joseph Catholic Church in Shawnee. Now next to it is the building which was used as a gathering place for the vigilance committees and so forth, and later became used as a bank. The little blacksmith shop stands next to the Hollenberg dry goods store, and then I see further down Panel's Mill and the Archer grocery store. Now there's an event taking place here that's very important to Shawnee, and that was the dedication of the church in 1868 by none other than Bishop Miege, the frontier bishop, who was dear friends with Bishop Lamy down in Santa Fe, and between the two of them, they did a lot to stabilize the traffic and the morality, perhaps, on the Santa Fe Trail. But he rode into Shawnee on a lumber wagon, and people thought he would be arriving in a beautiful black carriage, and they had a cannon set up on the square to fire a salute to him, and he chose the lumber wagon and a rocking chair that was propped up in the back, and he rode right past the delegation, and they came back all dejected. He rode in front of the cannon that was going to fire for him, and they didn't recognize him as the bishop. And later he had a big laugh about it. But that was a major event, Bishop Miege's arrival in Shawnee. This was celebrated by both Catholic and Protestant, the entire community. Directly below Bishop Miege is another cluster of people here. Ben Hollenbeck, the old merchant, he's shown there, and then Peter Wirtz directly behind him with his wife, Teresa. And Henry Earnshaw, the blacksmith, is right next to Teresa. And then above her is the man who caused so much fear out here, at least among some people, and that is Jesse James. And then juxtaposition to him, directly below him, is Bishop Miege. Now, right in the corner of the painting is a man who I stand on the shoulders of as far as the history of this area, and that was R.O. Larson. He was a Sunday school teacher and an early realtor, and he wouldn't sell any property on Sunday. He was that strict. But he kept records and he kept photographs, and he passed them on to his daughter Lucille, and that's where a lot of the reference for this painting came from. Remy Canaan, a Belgian immigrant who was also a realtor, and who built the beautiful old stone chateau type structure in Shawnee, the old castle. And Remy is there, and Chris Neiman, the founder of the bank, and then Paul and Madeline Vanderberg with the little baby there. And that little baby became Albert Vanderberg, one of the founders of the Vanderberg Van's Grocery Store, which was Van's Food Center, which was so important to the early or mid 20th century development of Shawnee. His mother's there with a basket of eggs. The figure of Kate Lynch. I got this wonderful photograph from Councilman Lynch of his mother, who was an elderly woman at the time, and it shows her as a little Irish milkmaid. But the cow was pointed in the wrong direction for my painting, so I turned it around, and of course she's milking on the wrong side. But I'm hoping that none of the experts will catch that. But she is typical of so many Irish immigrants that came to this area, including the McEnanys and others. And then there's a whole collection of fruits and vegetables and flowers at the base of the painting, which people don't think about, but Shawnee contributed so much to the greater Kansas City area as a truck gardening center by the Belgian people. Developed these wonderful vegetables for themselves and then took them into the markets, and this became an important market area. Now there's a series of homes and churches and vehicles coming down this road, and this is sort of in chronological order. At the top of the painting, you'll have horses and buggies and old homes, and then as you progress down the street of history, it develops into a woody and then a modern home, a modern car with Dr. Gorby Martin driving it. In this cluster of buildings here, we have the early churches, the early Black Baptist Church here, I believe, and early schools, and then clustered in there are the different denominations of churches. The fire truck, the old fire truck that was there. There was a streetcar line that came through Shawnee and went on west to Zara. It ran right in front of what is now the modern City Hall, and this is also depicted along this street, the modern city hall that we have now. There's a cluster of mayors and administrators here, and beginning with the longtime administrator Gary Montag, and then 3 mayors here. During the process of painting a mural, there are sometimes subjects that occur after the mural's finished that need to be added. Such is the case of our current mayor, Jim Allen. After watching him perform across the years, I felt that he should be an addition to the mural. And one weekend, while everybody was away from City Hall, I completed the work, and he was quite surprised when he came in and saw it the next day. I feel that a mural, like history itself, is an incomplete work, and as long as I'm around to make changes, I'd like to. I wasn't sure how many mayors to put in, so I ended up putting myself in as a compromise to the politicians, so they wouldn't get too upset. Directly above me is the old fire chief, and Charles Stump, the chief of police, who's served for many years. And then adjacent to him is Lucille Larson, the daughter of R.O. Larson, and then directly next to Lucille, Robert McCallop. Bob and I used to study history together, along with my old friend Gene Amos and his father there, and they're clustered together. The 3 historians of Shawnee, Mr. McCallop, and Mr. McCallop had a bus line here, I believe, and he and his family have been a long respected part of our community. Now, directly above these people, we've got the political leaders and the historians and the people who served in the fire department and the police department, and then those that have protected us and served us in the military through the years. Henry Sullivan in World War II, who liberated one of the concentration camps. And then directly above him, I believe, is a Canaan gentleman from World War I. And then adjacent to him is a grandson of Bob McCullough, who served in Desert Storm, and we see the flag flying behind them. These are men who are important to our Shawnee history, because without them, it's possible we wouldn't have a history. Now, adjacent to this is a good look back to our history, and Old Shawnee Town is developed there. We look to our history there, and then we look to the heroic men who served us, and we have the Hands of Freedom, and the Veterans Park that we have. Now, above it is our schools, and one of the things that Shawnee has had through the years, they've been blessed with good teachers and good schools, and I think the appropriations that we make toward the education of our people is so important, and that's one of the reasons Shawnee is a great community. Just beyond that is a collection of different homes as they were developed through the years. The ranch, the upscale, the apartments, that occurred later, condos and so forth, and then businesses that have flourished in the Shawnee area, the Zardas, the Vanderbergs, the Hartmans, and then as a conclusion to the painting, at the first part of the painting we have a woman with her daughter and the dog at the spring. Well, at the conclusion of the painting, we have a man and his son and the dog at the spring. So it's sort of a juxtaposition to these, to the beginning of our history and to the continuation of our history. And this young man just happens to be my son and my grandson. They were handy for models. Sometimes getting a model is difficult. The last cluster of people, the Zarda brothers, who had the Zarda Dairy and Sports Complex, and that have done so much for the community. And then Evelyn Van Kipsink, a civic leader who's encouraged our youth, and Bernard Sullivan, a man who has done a lot to preserve our history. He was a civic leader, also worked at the bank of the man right next to him, Clarence Flum. And Clarence Flum was and is a wonderful Shawnee leader. He's done a lot to encourage the growth through his loans at the bank and so forth. Directly above him is a mature head of the little baby that you saw earlier, and that's Albert Vanderberg. Our community is made up of a wonderful mosaic of cultures. It has the Belgian immigrants that did so much to create all the truck farms and so forth, the German immigrants that came in, the Irish immigrants that came in, so that all these different cultures create this wonderful mosaic. They all have their identity, and yet that identity creates this wonderful, beautiful, colorful composition that we call Shawnee. So in the last part of the painting, and this was an afterthought, it works with the architecture of the building. You have a crow step addition to the painting. You see it stepping down, following the architecture, and on it is a rainbow which extends from one side of the building to the other. And at the base of that rainbow are flowers which, to begin with, show the original people. And so you have indigenous flowers that were here from the beginning of time, sunflowers, and several other species that we see blooming even along the nature trail today in Shawnee Mission Park. On the other side of this crow step addition to the mural, we have flowers that were brought from Europe, and they represent the immigrants that came in at various times. It seems to me the Irish, of course, we think of with the shamrock, the Belgians with the red poppy. We think of Flanders Field, and of course we have our West Flanders Park. idolize that beautiful little white flower that's found in the Alps for the Germans and Hungarian people, the white lily for the French, the daffodils for the Welsh, the Tudor rose for the English people, the tulip for the people of Holland and Netherlands, and finally the thistle for the Scottish people that came. So without showing coats of arms and various heraldic devices, I've tried to show through these flowers the contribution and the diversity of the people who came and worked and played and made Shawnee great. There is an exhibit at our local museum now called Making the Good Life. And I think that people always want a better life. And the people that came to Shawnee and put in their sweat and tears and laughter and good planning have made a community that's absolutely terrific. It's a microcosm in some ways of our entire nation. Our entire nation is made up of this diversity, and I think it's the cream that rises to the top that created our great country. Thank you.